Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. And no, I'm not Aaron Gansky. I'm the co-host, Alton Gansky, and I'm commandeering this program today for a very special reason. A little bit later, we're going to be talking about how a book gets published, and we're going to be using Aaron's most recent release to demonstrate all of those things. So for now, I've just kind of taken over, and we'll be introducing other people, and everything else is going to be normal, but we're going to be talking about from beginning to end and what to do when your story doesn't feel right to you to begin with, and what you maybe ought to do with that thing that's sitting in the drawer for a long time again. So again, I'm Alton Gansky. I'm the author of about 50 books, many of them novels.
I'm Molly Jo Riley, producer of the podcast, author of the Unemployment Cookbook and the upcoming mystery location novel, NOLA.
And I'm Aaron Gansky, feeling slightly awkward going last. Things seem a little bit different tonight, so just happy to be here. Author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, including The Blood Sword, and now, as of today, who is Harrison Sawyer?
Yay.
Who is Harrison Sawyer? And the crowd goes wild.
Yay. So, congratulations, Aaron.
We're celebrating that, just so everyone knows. No, this is not going to be an hour-long promotion for the book. You're free to take it that way if you would like. But here at First in Fiction, we are dedicated to encouraging, inspiring, providing information, and pulling back the curtain so people can see what really goes on in publishing. And so we're going to see some of those things by talking about this most recent book. So just a couple of things that Aaron normally leads us in. For those of you that are listening to the audio and you want to see us live, you can do that on Tuesday at 6:30. And really the best way to do that is just go to aarongansky.com. There's a link up there that says live for First in Fiction. You click on that, then you can be part of the chat room and ask Molly difficult questions that she can't answer in short order, you know, that sort of thing.
Or that she can answer but chooses not to. There's
always that. There's always that. So you can certainly do that if you're one of our on-demand type listeners, or that is you've got a podcatcher that you're listening to and pulling it off of there, or you can also go to YouTube. You can see the videos there. But really, again, the best place, aarongansky.com. You can see the video cast there, the archives, as well as listen to it in audio only. So it's sort of it's like 7-Eleven. It has everything you need except the Slurpee.
That's the important thing, is the Slurpee, really. So
before we move to ask the author, you have an announcement for us, a different kind of announcement, I think, Aaron. So regale us.
I do. I'm not sure if this was done by design or not, but my publisher, LPC, has made the Kindle version of my book, Right to Be Heard, free today. You'll notice my lower third here has a different address. It's not the fancy schmancy aarongansky.com. Instead, it is http://eepurl.com/CJ capital A P capital Y capital L. That's a lot to remember, so I'll put that in the show notes.
And I've already put it in the chat room.
She's already put it in the chat room. Thank you, Molly Jo, and we'll put that hopefully on Facebook and Twitter as well. So if you're interested in getting a free Kindle copy of Right to Be Heard, now's your chance to do that. And I think it's just for today. So go ahead and pick up a copy of that. It's good to have handy. And it's a good little book. I co-wrote that with Diane Sherlock. So a lot of fun,
Well, let me ask this. If it's a Kindle copy, they can go to Amazon.com, can't they, and look up the title of the book?
That would actually probably be easier. And it is Write, W-R-I-T-E, to be heard. See, it's a clever play on words that my wife came up with. So
you writers.
She's a smart, punny one. So, but Write to be heard, W-R-I-T-E, to be heard, and this should pop up for you.
All righty. So, hey, a free book, and it's a good one. I have it. Well, we have an Ask the Author from Jacqueline Patterson, and she says, what are 5 flaws that will keep an agent or editor from considering the manuscript? And the hard part of answering this is keeping it down to 5. Aaron, what's your answer there?
This is one of those tricky ones, because I think if you ask 5 different authors / 5 different publishers / editors, you're going to get 5 different answers. It's kind of like calling the IRS. You're not going to get the same answer twice. And so I don't know, maybe Pops, maybe you duplicated some of mine, but really for me, there are a couple things that I looked at when I was an editor for the Citron Review. For me, it's cliche descriptions and story setup. So when I feel like I've been there already, I'm not interested. Melodramatic writing for me is a sign of an inexperienced writer, somebody who doesn't trust themselves enough to give good, solid, original descriptions. So melodramatic writing is kind of a no-no for me. You know, tears running like rivers and kind of going off on that. I prefer a subtle touch. Too much telling. I've got to have some imagery, and it doesn't need to be top to bottom, first page to last page. I just need one or two good, solid descriptions or images that I can really hang my hat on, especially if it's flash fiction. I just need a couple of them. If it's a novel, I'm going to need, you know, one or two every page, every other page, something like that. Just give me enough to kind of keep me going so that I can develop the story world in my mind, that I can kind of get to know these characters a little bit better. Lack of careful proofreading. If you don't care enough to proofread, then I'm not sure why I care enough to publish. I know that seems really, really harsh, but if I'm looking at a bunch of typos, you clearly haven't proofread this before you've sent it out, and it's just not ready to be looked at. And I've actually gotten several submissions that are funny. They've been double submissions. So they'll submit it once, and they'll submit the same story a second time, and they'll be like, I found one typo. I'm sorry, here's an updated version. And I think, oh, I missed the typo. So hooray. And that's kind of the boat that you want to be in, is showing that you're diligent and showing that you're careful and cautious with those types of things. Also, don't rely on the editor to fix your mistakes. I have a lot of friends that are editors. I would never dream of saying, hey, this novel is riddled with punctuation errors and grammatical usage errors and spelling errors. Why don't you take a look at it for me? I wouldn't do that. So
as
kind
an
of
editor,
keep that in mind.
I just want to say we really appreciate that.
Yeah. So you want to think of that as well. And by the way, I do some acquisitions editing from time to time. And so these are things that I look for as well in the novel length work that I look at. And lastly, boring dialogue and character interaction. And if that sounds harsh, it's just, it kind of goes back to the cliche stuff. If your character seems like every other character I've ever read, if I'm reading a YA dystopian and your character is just like Katniss or Triss or all the others, not super interested. You've got to find something that's going to set them apart in some way. Their dialogue, especially. Reading your dialogue should not sound like a bad movie script or a bad television script. Like, it needs to be punchy, it needs to be original, it needs to be unique to your characters. So those are the things I think that really kind of sink a book. And I'm just kind of moving quickly through those. How about you, Pops?
Yeah, those are all very good. The only thing I would add to that is your manuscript does not have to be perfect. It's very difficult to get perfection, even after they've been through several edits. When a book's published, there are often typos, a punctuation mistake and stuff like that. And that's one way you know you're reading the first edition. But you want to minimize it as much as possible. And then don't do what I do, is all my typos make sense, and they're usually funny or embarrassing. So don't leave a character injured and have him described as having eternal injuries. You're going to be hurting forever. There are a whole bunch of other ones that I have done. Well, there's a whole bunch of these, but let me just I'm going to give you 6. I'm going to give you a bonus. But they go like this. These are some of the biggies. Your story starts off slow, then it bogs down from there. And we see that a lot, especially if they're imitating somebody who's been writing in the 1920s. We are in the 1800s, which is even worse, where they start off very slow. They tend to start slow. Today, that doesn't fly. So if you start off too slow, there's a good chance the story's going to bog down, and no one's going to invest the time to read through that. Sloppy point of view. Remember, point of view are the eyes you see through. You only get to be in one head at a time when you're writing in third person. Don't jump heads, skip heads. Those are called point of view shifts. Unless you're writing in third person omniscient, where it's the God view, where you have God reading everyone's mind and telling you what's going on in that. That's very difficult for readers to follow. And you have to be a very good writer to pull that off. Unrealistic behavior of characters. If your characters are just doing stupid stuff, then pretty soon the editor is going to start saying the hero's hiding behind the door. Go get him. Because they're just unbelievable or say stupid things. So make sure your characters ring true. Confusing action. If an editor or an agent has to stop and try to figure out who's doing what, then they're going to pass on it. They're not going to invest any more time. The story has little or no conflict, no sense of urgency, no reason to care. That'll get you bumped pretty quick. And then the bonus, lack of an original idea. There's only so many basic story ideas, but they can all be done in unique and different ways. And if yours is just, the same as what's been coming out recently, they're not going to want it because it'll be stale by the time your book hits the shelf. So those are mine. Molly.
I don't have a list of 5 because by the time I was able to put my comments into the show notes, you guys beat me to just about everything I would say, with the exception of that I'd like to add presentation is a big one. I think if your presentation is less than professional or is substandard, if your query is out of the norm, that may blow you out of the water right away, no matter how good your manuscript is. So you have to bring not only a great manuscript, but great skills and etiquette to the table. And that's how you get people's attention.
All right. I would also add, if you're going to do 6 pops, I might as well do 6.
I'm going to do 7.
I'll do 7.
I got 10. They're all in my head. Let's go.
I've got 8.
I'll see you 9.
Do I hear 9?
Bring it on.
I would add waking up, beginning with a character waking up and then looking in the mirror. And I remember, I think it was Chip McGregor who called me out on that, because I think the bargain originally opened with somebody waking up and looking in the mirror, and he was like, no. I'm like, don't do that. So, just kind of those cliche openings. What is it? I think Jerome Stern says, or I can't remember who says this, but the only person to ever write about somebody waking up in an interesting way was Franz Kafka when he wrote Metamorphosis. Gregory Samsa awoke one morning to find he'd been transformed into a tremendous bug or cockroach.
It was a cockroach.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. And then he can look in the mirror, and I'm okay with that. Then I'm totally fine with it.
Right.
Well, Dan Brown did it in the Da Vinci Code.
Oh, really?
The protagonist, yeah. He's as I recall, he's in a hotel. He's awakened by a phone, and he's sitting on the edge of the bed looking into a mirror, as I recall.
There's, in Divergent, Triss looks in the mirror for several minutes with the description. That's a typical first person setup because you want to describe the physical features without it feeling unnatural, but then the mirror scene feels unnatural. The way that Divergent pulled it off, arguably successfully, is that Triss was a part of a faction that was not supposed to be not supposed to care about personal appearance. They were supposed to be very subdued, etc. And so they didn't have mirrors, and they didn't look in mirrors. So to look in a mirror was a big thing, and you could only do it like once a year or something like that. So that's kind of how she played it off. And that's at least a little bit better than just, waking up looking in a mirror. So there we go. That's what I got.
All righty. Well, let's get to the meat of the evening here. As I said earlier, I'm commandeering the podcast tonight so that I can play the role of interviewer. And when I was doing my podcast, Writer's Talk, I did about 70 of those where I was interviewing people. And it's a role I enjoy a great deal. So I'm going to play the interviewer as we talk about how Aaron's new book came to be and some of the things that he had to go through and the book had to go through before it hit the shelves today. So Aaron, who is the founder of this podcast, is going to be a guest on his own show, which is kind of weird. Seems kind of weird, doesn't it, Aaron?
It does. I want to thank myself for having me here. Had a lot of scheduling conflicts, but I kept at it, kept pestering myself until I finally agreed, so I could be here. So I'm excited to be here with me, and also with you.
Well, I very much appreciate being in second place in that sentence.
This is almost following the lines of Hearing Voices last week.
Kind of. All right, so the name of the book
run in
is...
circles around here.
The name of the book is Who is Harrison Sawyer? This is your latest novel. but it's not really your most recent writing. You started, as I recall, much earlier and then put it away for a while, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But just so everyone knows, especially those who are listening for the first time, I never like to assume everybody knows what's going on. There's always some new people. But if my count is right, you've published 6 books.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem right? 4 novels?
Yeah. 4 novels, 2 nonfiction on the craft of writing. And it seems weird to say 4 because 2 of them came out this year. So last year I only had 2. This year I've got 4. Most recently today, who is Harrison Sawyer. In addition to The Bargain, the Book of Things to Come, and The Blood Sword, which are the 2 books in the Hand of Adonai series. I've also written Right to Be Heard, which is free today, again on Amazon, with Diane Sherlock, who's a friend of mine from Antioch University. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's where I got my MFA. But also Firsts in Fiction, the book from which our podcast takes its name, on how to write good opening sentences, good opening lines for fiction.
All righty. So this new book comes out today, and this podcast is about the book's journey. We usually think of the author's journey, and that's certainly part of it. But the book's journey from concept to publication, and some of those aren't always smooth or a straight line, as I understand is true with this book. So tell our listeners a little bit about the book itself. So give us the elevator pitch.
So kind of an abbreviated version here of the back cover copy would sound something like this. Desperate to rediscover his estranged son, Marshall Sawyer agrees to finish the autobiography Harrison began before his untimely death. But the passages described in the book do not match the life Marshall remembers with his son. As he begins to investigate, he soon discovers a dangerous plot, one that puts his life in danger and the future of America at risk. Bum, bum, bum. Wow. I did not end with an ellipses. I just want that to be clear.
Duly noted.
So, is it a thriller? Is it a mystery?
Yes, absolutely. What do you want it to be? It's a literary thriller, mystery, fantasy, science fiction. No, I'm joking. I would definitely put it in the kind of a mystery / thriller. I think if it were to be shelved at Barnes & Noble, it would be among the conspiracy books. And I think that's really where it would find its home. It's really kind of a thriller / mystery / conspiracy, if that makes sense.
Now, yeah, for our listeners, our viewers, there may be some who do not know this, but it is very common to use 2 genres together when describing a book. So romantic comedy is an example, or mystery suspense kind of book that goes on. So it is not unusual to do 2 designations like that. This is a story that's been with you for a while, isn't that right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there's really, my first novel is probably the only other one that's lived with me this long. I guess that's not necessarily true, but this one dates back to Antioch. And I began, I want to say it was 2008 when I began this. I first had this story idea and I thought this is going to be something that I'm going to write. And so while at Antioch, kind of an interesting thing here, I was, you would select a mentor each semester to work with. And the first name on everybody's wish list, every student's wish list, they would always put Steve Heller. He was the chair of the MFA program, and he was the hot commodity. Like if you could get him as a mentor, you're doing pretty well for yourself. He took a very limited amount of students each semester. And so it was really an honor and a privilege to be accepted by him. Really, he only took about 2 or 3 students each semester. I think by the time he picked me or agreed to have me as a student, I think he had taken on like 4 or 5 that semester. He'd taken on a larger crowd. So, but it was a big deal. Here's the chair of the MFA program, one of the top 5 low residency schools in America, very prestigious reputation. And he is the guy. And so I wanted to make a good impression with him. And so I gave him the first chapter of Harrison Sawyer. And he, I got to tell you, was not impressed at all, not even a little bit. He gave me some notes, gave me a lot of notes. I'm still reading his notes currently. And so I ended up having to rewrite the entire thing basically from the ground up.
You did. Well, just for grins and giggles then, because we've had this discussion a few times, how many rewrites did Harrison Sawyer go through?
I stopped counting somewhere around 314. No, I kid. I tease. On the conservative side, I would say probably 5. And I think that was the magic number where Steve kind of said, just let it go. If you include the revision that I did once I had a contract, I only did about 2 drafts there, not counting the editorial process. And so that on the low side, 2 complete drafts, but the intro, the opening had been done at least 5 or 6 different times. Those are my false starts, if you will. And I rewrote the thing 5 or 6 times, and every time Steve kept saying it's not working, which was crushing. It was absolutely crushing. And he kept saying the voice was wrong, which I found intriguing, because this was after I'd had that workshop with the voice whisperer, we called her, at Antioch, and she told me, yes, you've found your voice. So I thought I was in good shape, but he disagreed with this particular project.
So this comes to you, this idea, 8 years ago. And so while you're getting your graduate degree, the Master's of Fine Arts there at Antioch, you get what every writer hates, a rejection, in a sense. He just rejected what you gave him.
Yeah, that's essentially what it was. I mean, it began as a series of rewrites. This isn't working, try this. This first line, and that was crushing for me. This first line isn't working, try this. And so I experimented with different things. I ended up writing background scenes that were never going to make it into the novel, but it was just for me to kind of figure out the characters. And so he gave me all these different assignments, and each time I kept thinking, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the one. And each time it came back, and no, this is most definitely not the one. I'm not sure if he just got sick of the project, if he never really liked the idea, or if I was just really struggling that much. And I feel it's probably the latter. I was probably just struggling that much with it.
A lot of people don't realize that, a lot of up-and-coming writers, is that sometimes it really is a struggle. Some people get the idea that a writer sits down at the computer, starts typing, and then gold just comes out. It's usually not that way. It's sometimes it's more like a dental procedure. It's painful, and you keep hammering away at it till you find what really works. Now, you mentioned the voice whisperer. We talked a little bit about this last week, but just remind everyone again, when you talk about a voice whisperer, what are you referring to?
So the idea was, since it was set up on a mentorship type of a model, there was one mentor. Each mentor had something that they were particularly good at. Steve Heller was famous for saying, I'll work with anybody, but if you write horror, I'm just going to laugh at you the whole time. So, if you're writing horror, don't pick me, So each mentor had something that they were good with. And I remember her name was Alma. She was widely considered to be the best at helping young writers find their voice, finding the natural style that works for them on their different projects. And I'd had a class with her and submitted something, short story, and she said, this is it, you found your voice. And so I was pretty excited about that. I had actually planned on selecting her. This may have been the same quarter, as a matter of fact, or the same semester. I planned on selecting her to try and work on my voice, but once she gave me that feedback, I thought, oh, then maybe I don't need to spend a semester with her. Apparently, I could have spent a semester with her and learned quite a bit, but instead, I was lucky enough to get Steve and start the Harrison Sawyer project.
So, what did when you say Steve, you're referring to your mentor?
Yeah, Steve Heller, the chair of the MFA program at Antioch. I believe he's still there, still going strong.
So once you get your MFA, you can start calling the, well, we used to call major professors. That was a different field. You could call your mentor by their first name, huh? Or the school was that liberal?
Well, the school made Berkeley look conservative. So yeah, the school was very liberal, but that's how we referred to everybody. And which is strange because growing up in high school and in college, all through college, I always used professors' last names, but for some reason at Antioch, it was the part of the culture was very kind of low key, very relaxed, very laid back kind of an atmosphere, and everybody just went by first names. He always introduced himself as Steve, and so yeah, I still call him Steve sometimes, and he doesn't talk often to me, so maybe I should start calling him Professor Heller, or
Well, when
Dr.
you send him a
Heller.
copy of the book,
I should.
Oh, there you go.
I need to connect with him on Facebook again, and let him know, hey, it's in print. Maybe you can read this and tell me why it doesn't work.
to which people who teach MFAs would say, being in print doesn't mean it's good.
True.
So, all right.
But this one is.
Well, I believe that. I love the name too, Harrison Sawyer. That's just a perfect character name. So now, did he give you some advice? Here he's telling you, no, this isn't it. This isn't working. So did he give you some hands-on advice?
Oh yeah, I've got plenty of comments, and I believe I actually saved them. I probably should have pulled them out for tonight, but I would have had to unearth them, which is quite a feat. But really just a ton of writing exercises, most of which I've already kind of mentioned here, rewriting the beginning. He had me do character scenes. I think one of his major concerns, and this was one of the challenges of the book, was that I was trying to develop a character who was dead. And the reader has no experience with the character except for a short prologue. They have no other experience with this character except from what they hear about him from other characters. And I think because of that unique challenge, I think what Steve was focusing in on, or Professor Heller was focusing in on, was that I didn't understand who Harrison was. I didn't know. The whole thing is that he ran away at 15 and never spoke again to his father. And he has this whole life between the ages of 15 and when he marries his wife that are just off the record book. And nobody knows what was going on during that time. But whatever it was, it's has some pretty far-reaching consequences. And so that was the thing. I knew that about him. I knew he was involved in something perhaps nefarious, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know how he got involved in it, and I didn't know why somebody would want him dead. And so he had me writing a lot of scenes from the perspective of Harrison that we both knew would never actually be in the book. But I think his goal there was to help me understand the character because, and you guys have heard me advocate this on the show, you need to know your characters intimately, even if your readers won't know them to the same depth that you do. As a matter of fact, they probably won't. But it doesn't change the fact that authors are responsible for really knowing their characters. And I think I can say, looking back, I didn't really know who Harrison Sawyer was at that point. And that's where a lot of my struggles came, I think.
What other writing exercises did he give you?
He had me work on the beginning again. I remember rewriting the opening page several times. Some of the other characters he didn't like. He did like my dialogue. He did like the concept, as I recall. But it was a lot of character work that he was having me do. And he's very good at characters. And that's kind of where he, I cut his teeth, whatever, built his reputation. Is by developing these characters. And as a matter of fact, he had written a novel called The Automotive History of Lucky Kellerman, which in part of the requirements for the work that we had to do during our time at our MFA program at Antioch, we had to annotate several novels throughout the semester, about one a month, I believe, actually 2 books a month, I believe, and write up critiques and reviews on them. And so that was largely about a father and a son and the relationship between the two. And here I am trying to write a similar book to what he had put together. And it's unique and interesting because I think I was trying to achieve the same shape that he built for his novel for mine. And I think he recognized that that wasn't going to work the way that I wanted it to work. And so it was a lot of reshaping of characters, a lot of rewriting of particular scenes, a lot of background exploration. I wish I could be a little more specific, but that's really all I remember, except for him telling me in no uncertain terms, it's time to move on. It's time to kill the project. This is never going to be good enough.
Ouch.
Well, now that had to hurt.
It was painful. And so when I put it away, it was with the idea that it was going to be gone for a while, and probably always gone. I think that was one of the books that I'd quietly strangled in my sleep, just thinking that it was never going to be resurrected. And it hurt, because there are some other books I've written. For example, my first novel, which is not published and will never be published, I've often contemplated going back to that, and I'm like, I can't go back to that. That's just no good. I have no problem with that sitting in a drawer forever, and never seeing the light of day. But this one, I kind of felt, it's outside of my genre, but that it's still kind of stuck with me. It still kind of stuck with me.
For years I've taught that the best story ideas haunt the writer. They just keep going up and down the mental corridors of the writer, and haunting him. And that's one of the things I try to use to determine whether or not a story idea is any good. If it just will not leave me alone, then maybe I need to pay it some attention. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just talking about some of these old projects, and some of them are quite content to be abandoned. I think they like the quiet, the quiet of the drawer. It's peaceful in there. It's dark. They can get some sleep. Not much is expected of them. They just lay around all day and only ask to be fed twice. And now I'm thinking of my cat. I'm sorry. I get them confused.
Cat reference.
Yeah, but they're quite content. These earlier novels that I started and abandoned, they're fine remaining dead. The ones that I started before Antioch, the ones that came to me at Antioch, tend to come back. And so I think I mentioned this on an earlier cast, but really what happened was that my agent, who's listening in, hi Dave Fessenden, contacted me last summer, I believe, and said, what are you working on right now? And I was like, well, the Hand of Adonai series. And he's like, no, other than that. And I thought, what are you talking about other than that? Like, I got to finish this. Until this is done, I don't do anything else. And he was wise enough to say, you know what, why don't you let me try and sell something for you while you're finishing that up? And I thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so immediately, I think he'd asked for two, and I knew one was going to be The Implausibles, and I knew the other one was going to be Harrison Sawyer. It was actually the first thing that came to mind when he said, what else are you working on? And I thought, I don't have anything. And then I thought, yes, I do. And that it came back to me then, and there was that doubt that it wasn't good enough. I have no business putting a proposal together for a novel like this. That's not good enough. But he wanted a proposal, and so thank you, Dave. I put a proposal together, and it worked out.
Nice. You referenced earlier that this is one of those stories that kind of kept at you throughout the years. What was it in particular about this story that kept nudging you?
So I think I'm kind of a sucker for father-son stories. I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, absolutely fell in love with it. The Automotive History of Lucky Kellerman by Steve Heller just, I think, really impacted me. But there is the core concept of a father who is estranged from his son, having to rediscover him after 2 decades of silence. I don't know what it is about that particular idea that just really hits me. I don't think I'm alone when I explain that, but you can imagine having to write an autobiography for your son who you don't really know that well, and what kind of pathos that has, what kind of appeal to the reader's emotions. It's really poignant, and it has, I think, the potential to be something really, really special. And at the risk of sounding egotistical or narcissistic, I think this draft that came out is infinitely better than anything I started at Antioch. And I think it's because I had a better idea of my characters and the situation. It's definitely not something that's in my genre. And so I think, intrigued by the challenge of it. But it's really that the core of it is just that the desire for a father to become reacquainted with his son, having to deal with the fact that he's too late to make any sort of reconciliation with his son, but now he's got an opportunity through the process of finishing this autobiography that was begun. And so I just really like that setup, for whatever reason, just really kind of spoke to me.
It sounds to me like a great concept, that when you have that kind of emotional bonding and something that's out of someone's control, and you've done this in a couple of books where things are happening and they're out of the protagonist's control, and I think everybody could relate to a character like that who's trying to do something now that probably should have been done a long time ago, maybe couldn't be done. So I think it's a powerful storyline. But so this thing just kept bugging you then some? Did it just return to you from time to time? Because you didn't throw it away.
No, I didn't. I put it to sleep. Oh, wow, that sounded very fatal. I put it to rest.
Poor manuscript.
This is getting to be really dark. It's one of those things where I put it away, and I didn't have any active plans to come back to it. I didn't. But I found myself thinking about it. And I remember kind of a funny story. At one point, once I was working on the proposal, I had to figure out how this guy was killed. And so I was teaching AP English 3 at the time, and I asked my students, they're actually in the acknowledgments, I said, how would you murder somebody and make it look like an accident? And the
Public
amount of
education at its
answers I
best.
got, and I think it was like a do now. It was like, in a short paragraph, explain how you might murder somebody and not get caught and make it look like an accident. And I said, no, I'm not planning on killing anyone. Just do it. And so what was most surprising to me is the amount of answers and the creativity of the answers, and the fact that everyone had a plan. And I think what was more appalling was the fact that they were all pretty good plans, actually. And so that was a little unnerving, but it was definitely fun. So I had those types of questions in my mind. Those were the things that I knew weren't working in the first draft. And so I wanted to make sure I got them polished up for this draft. And so I kind of found myself thinking about it from time to time.
All right. So there's got to be some emotional stuff going on here. You've been told by your mentor, you need to put this thing away. It's not working. So, he's just wanting you to put the thing down. And so you do. You set it aside. And you've expressed some doubts from time to time about the project itself. So how did you deal with that storm of doubts that had to be going on? How did you overpower those doubts?
I think I've had people ask me how I deal with writer's block, and I tell them, just tell writer's block no and keep going. And that's kind of, Pops, I think I've learned that from you. You just keep going. You just roll up your sleeves and go to work. And so I had this storm of doubt, and I was very much disheartened and saddened by the fact that my mentor didn't like the book. But when I was talking with Dave and he wanted a proposal, I thought, let's give it a go. I mean, the reality is it's been, at that point, 7 years. I'm a better writer now than I was 7 years ago. And so I kind of handled it that way, just roll up my sleeves, go to work. And in the process of doing the proposal, I think at first the hardest thing was putting the proposal together, getting my mind right, getting that doubt out of my head. But I just kept saying, well, the worst that happens is people say no. I'm not going to lose any money on this. Nobody's going to charge me money for having to read this proposal. He just wants a proposal. And if it sucks, Dave's going to tell me, because he's cool like that. He'll let me know. And so I felt, let me do this. Let me put the proposal together. And I did. Let me write a few sample chapters. And I think that was the turning point for me, was those sample chapters, because they were good. And I found myself wanting to finish. And so originally when Dave contacted me, and I was in the middle of, neck deep in Hand of Adonai, and he says, "What else are you working on?" I said, "Nothing, but I could put together proposals for these." So I put the proposals together for both of the books. And then I thought, I like both of these and I want to finish them. And that was a unique place for me to be in, because now I've got to choose which project am I going to work on. And so I waited. And basically once the contract came in for Harrison Sawyer, I knew that had to be top priority. And so I went back to it. And I was actually relieved to be able to finish the book, because I wanted very much to finish it. And I'm a discovery writer, so I wanted to know where it went. I mentioned this as well earlier, that this, I think, was the first book in which the ending came to me before I was actually at the end. It came when I was maybe a third of the way through the book. And that really made the writing go a lot easier. And so, if you're a writer and you're struggling with doubt, that's fine. Welcome to the club. I don't think there's a writer out there who doesn't doubt themselves and their abilities at some point. But it doesn't mean we stop. It doesn't mean we give up. It doesn't mean we quit. And so roll up your sleeves and keep writing. And eventually, even if you have to put the project away for a few years, it doesn't mean the project is dead. There's always that hope for the Lazarus manuscript, the resurrection. And of course, whatever comes out of it is going to be better than what you put away years ago.
My book, Wounds, had been around in my mind for a long time. And it got its start when an editor at a writer's conference said, "Pitch something to me. I want to know what you're working on." And that was the only thing that I could think of. That was the one that was haunting me. So I pitched it badly, as a matter of fact, because I hadn't worked on the thing in so long. But I pitched it. They bought it, and then it came out. So I understand that process. I also understand and want to reiterate to our listeners that doubt is part of the process. We always self-doubt. This is art. And when you start messing with art, you always start wondering whether or not you can do it. And then after you do it and you do a great job, you wonder if you can do it again. And I know for the longest time, when I got my first book published, I was ecstatic. And then my thought was, what if I'm a one-book wonder? Turns out I wasn't a wonder, but, could I do another one? And I did another one, and I did another one. But every time I think, am I going to lose the ability to do this? And sometimes I finish the day feeling like I've wasted the day writing garbage. And other times I think, well, this is spot on. Maybe there's hope for me yet. So it's not unusual. It is part of the creative process. Okay, so now you decide to go with the project, regardless of the doubts from your professor and personal doubts about it. What did you do then that you hadn't done with the book before? What kind of changes did you make that made it go from being a book not worthy to be looked at to a book that a publisher would want?
I think the deep point of view that I adopted, I knew Marshall a lot better at this point. Marshall Sawyer is Harrison's father. I knew him better. It may just be that I was older and could now project a little bit more. When I first started writing it, my kids were, infants and toddlers. And at this point that I'm writing it, at the point that I was writing it, my oldest son was in 6th grade. And it doesn't sound very old, but the fact that they're getting older and I can now see the future, the future's coming a lot faster than I anticipated. Maybe it's just the years as a father that helped unlock Marshall to me. So I could tap into that kind of patronal instinct, if you will. There we go. Yeah. That's the word that I want.
Sure.
Tap into that fatherly kind of a feeling. I think that helped out. Really, for me, I think the formula, going back to a familiar formula, going back to voice, I tend to do well with third-person point of view, which what I'll call serial limited, where I do one chapter in the point of view of a character at a time. Expanding the point of view helped out quite a bit. So I added 2 additional points of view. And one was Harrison's wife, which was crucial to the story because it allowed me to develop Harrison from more than just one angle. The other was from the antagonist's point of view, which helped me to develop the conspiracy elements that would have been lacking otherwise. And so finding that formula for me, I think, was the kind of the key to success to writing a novel that actually held together, was being able to show what was at stake, and show exactly how little Marshall knew, and how dangerous it was to know so little about his son. And so really, I think that's what it was, is I found my comfort zone that I had established in the Hand of Adonai series, which has the same point of view type of a setup. And that's kind of what I'm used to, what I'm comfortable reading and writing. And I think that bringing that in really helped me to kind of finish that project out.
So when you begin to shop the idea through a proposal, and I think we've talked about proposals on this program. We've got it in the archive somewhere. But for those, again, first-time listeners or just new to the program, proposal is a sort of a digest of the book, and it's where you pitch the book and give a synopsis, and it has sample chapters that go along with it. And so the question is, did you shop this through a proposal only? Had the book been finished when you were shopping it? You'd already written the end, or did you finish it after you had a contract?
I finished it after the contract, and this was one of the first books that I think this is actually the only book that I've sold on spec. Is that what you call it? Where the book is not done, but you've got the sample chapters, etc. And so I had not anticipated that at all. I was pleased when I was offered a contract. I was excited about that, especially the fact that it came so quickly was really encouraging. But I was neck deep in the installment of the next Hand of Adonai series, and I wanted to finish that up. I'm still working on it. I'd still like to put it to bed, but I wanted to finish that first. And so that's the project I'm doing when I'm not actively working on deadline. And I've kind of put myself on deadline for that particular book, but I figured publication was a long-term game. Nobody's going to get back to me quickly. It's going to be months before I hear anything, and hopefully by that time I can finish up Hand of Adonai. But turns out I couldn't. I had some interest from another publisher on the other proposal that I put together that summer, and so I immediately started working on that. And then this contract came through, and I signed it, and so I stopped that project to do Harrison Sawyer, so that I could go back to the other project, so that I could go back to Harrison Sawyer. And so I was 3 projects deep, which is a really good problem to have. But this, again, was the first book that I'd sold before I'd published it. And so it was the first time that I felt like I was under the gun, that I didn't have time to kind of, if I didn't meet my word limit, it wasn't the end of the world. Now it was like, it might be, I might have to really push on this one. And so it was unique in that aspect too, because it was my first experience writing more on deadline than I have been used to in the past.
Yeah, let me throw a little explanation in for those not familiar with the publishing process and why there are deadlines. The reason a publisher sets a deadline is they have other departments that are doing things. They have marketing, they have sales, they have people doing the artwork, they have people doing the interior design and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of people involved. And then it's set up for a catalog, and catalogs come out in seasons, depending on the publisher, but twice a year, sometimes, maybe 3 times a year. And they will get it into the catalog. But you don't get the book to them in time. They've now advertised a book that they don't have to sell. And so it puts them in a bad spot that way. And sometimes what they do is they'll just hold it out for a season. So you might be looking at 3, 4, 6 months before the book comes out if you miss your deadline some. So you always want to stay in touch with your editor while you do that. Okay, so let me ask you this now. Tell us a little bit about the publisher and about the process of the acceptance.
This was published by LPC, Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas. They did the bargain. They've got an imprint called Brimstone. They've got several imprints, one of which is called Brimstone, which does speculative fiction. And Brimstone does the Hand of Adonai series. So I'm real familiar with the the publisher, and just enjoy a really good reputation with them, or relationship with them is the word that I'm looking for. And because of that, there's some familiarity with me as an author, them as a publisher. They know what to expect. They know that if I say I'm going to get a project done, that it's going to get done. And so they, I think, had little concerns about signing me, even though the project wasn't done. They know that I can produce the work when I need to. And really, the contract that they offered me, the only thing that surprised me was, again, the speed with which it came. And normally, Pops, you know this, the publishing process is a much longer kind of a situation. But because LPC is so small comparative to, larger houses, and, their staff is much smaller compared to what you're going to see at like a New York publisher, they can actually do things a lot quicker. And so they were able to look at it, and it went through the acceptance process, and they offered me a contract for it. And so pretty standard contract. And because I was familiar with it before, it was pretty much business as usual. They sent me a contract that had already made changes that I'd made in previous contracts. So the agent looked over it, Dave looked over it. We were comfortable with it. We signed it and sent it back. It was really, really easy. The whole process, I feel a little bit guilty that it was so easy, because I know these things can sometimes be quite challenging, quite the nightmare, but it was quick, it was efficient, and it was welcomed.
Yeah, publishing can be slow. You're right. It moves at glacial speeds. I tell people it's like watching tortoises race. But I have also seen what you're describing, where things turn around. I think I've had one or two cases where I've turned in a proposal and gotten a response in a month.
Wow.
Yeah. Of course, a lot of that depends if you know people, you're going to the conferences, they know you. That can be very helpful too. Can you estimate how much time you spent on the project?
I can. Any other questions?
Will you?
No, will you? That's the next question.
Okay.
Will you tell us about that? Because I know it sat in a drawer for a while.
It did. So Pops, but you did mention that you'd gotten some responses back within a month. And I think that, like you say, the writers' conferences are good for that, because you develop those relationships with publishers. But usually the responses you're getting within a month are not positive responses.
That's right.
Right? Usually it's, hey, thanks for submitting. We're not taking submissions right now. Or, oh, your submission doesn't meet the guidelines, or whatever the case may be. Usually if it's a quick response, it's usually not a positive response. So to have a quick positive response is fairly uncommon. Not completely unheard of, but fairly uncommon. So, and Pops, the ones that you got were quick positive responses. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much time did I spend on this? I'm not going to count shelf time, because it would really depress me if I said it took me 7 or 8 years to write a book. That would be very depressing. So instead, I'll just count the time where I was actively working on it. And so you got to figure maybe a half of a semester, a few months, couple months that I worked on it. Then, maybe 3 months the most. Then the proposal took me maybe a week to put together, to get those sample chapters. And proposals are not necessarily fun to write. I didn't mind the sample chapters, but the proposals, not a lot of fun. A lot of research that goes into that. But it was summer break, so I was able to really focus on that. And I guess I should, announce that this was on my summer vacation, and so I was able to really put some time into it, like a full-time writer might, rather than somebody who's got a day job. It may not be super realistic to think that you're going to pound out a proposal inside of a week if you've got a day job. But I had summer, so I was lucky about that. About a week there, maybe 2. First draft took me probably 3, possibly as much as 4 months. I am not the fastest writer, but I am far from the slowest writer. I've actually been told several times that I've been described as a prolific writer. But usually people describing me as prolific are people who don't write as much as me. So I don't know if that really counts or not. Now, Pops, if you called me prolific, I would take that to heart. I would be happy.
Well, if we're talking 6 books, yeah, there's writers whose entire careers don't go 6 books.
True that. True that. So, okay, now I feel better about myself. Thank you very much. I'm so glad I had myself on the show to build myself up like this. But then there was revision. Revision, oh man, that for me takes a while because I really put a lot of time and effort into it. So another few weeks there, possibly another month. And then it was ready to be sent off for the editing process, which I was still terrified about, by the way. I was afraid it was going to get to my editor and they were going to say no and just send it back. Like I was just ready for this to be rejected out of hand because it's so far out of my comfort zone, so far out of my genre. But I think I gained a lot of confidence when my editor, Bethany, read it and she said, no, this is good. I was excited about that. That her opinion meant a lot to me.
Nice. Okay, so the bottom line is, Who is Harrison Sawyer came out today, but it was something that started almost 8 years ago. And it had its ups and downs, and other projects took center stage for a while. But in the end, and due to Dave Fessenden asking you what you're working on, keeping the whip to the back, helped make this possible. So that's great. So congratulations on the release, and thanks for doing this, taking time to chat with us on your own program. Always a good thing. Molly, we have any questions from the chat room?
Not too many questions. Dave Fessenden and Andy Clapp were in the chat room. Andy did ask a question, but I said we're going to table that and use that for our Ask the Author question next week. Dave said, is there a recent story or maybe a TV series or movie where it begins with someone waking up and looking in a mirror and not recognizing themselves? They have amnesia.
Let me stop you there. The next Harbinger's book, which comes out on Halloween, that's how it starts.
Really?
They're
well, there you go.
Those who read it know that I write from Tank's character of the four writers. I have Tank, and he wakes up in a tuxedo with a nasty taste in his mouth, and he has no idea where he is or who he is.
Does he know who he is? Oh, no. Wow.
And so I have a mirror scene. I was thinking about that when Aaron was talking about it, because he looks in the mirror and he notices things about himself. He's a former football player, college football player. And but it still doesn't ring any bells with him. So yeah, there have been those. And then I did one with for life of me, I can't think of the book now.
Distant Memory.
Yeah, Distant Memory was another amnesia story. I just recycle things. I just change the names, in the setting.
Okay, then.
But yeah, that was someone who had been in a car accident and had no memory. It was traumatic amnesia.
Was also woke up in a hotel room.
In a hotel room.
She got there, and that one, the Distant Memory had a bit of a Born Identity kind of a flavor to it. So it's a good book. I suggest you guys pick it up if you get a chance.
Oh, just pick them all up.
They have both, Andy and Dave have downloaded the Right to Be Heard, and Andy has already ordered Harrison Sawyer off of Amazon. So he says that his weekend is taken care of. Thank you, Aaron Gansky.
I'll do what I can.
Outstanding.
So I do hope you enjoy it, though. Would love, of course, if you do read it, reviews always help out. So even if they're negative reviews, go ahead and put them up there. It's fine.
He did say he'll post a review after he's done reading. He already said that. So
thank you, Andy.
You didn't even
Andy's
have
a
to.
good guy.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. So
that's
okay.
it.
There we go.
We're done with the chat room.
All righty. Well, Aaron, thanks for being a guest on your own show. That was really nice of you, and for sharing about the ups and downs of the creative process. And again, one of the reasons I want to do this is because it had so much time in the drawer. And almost every book author has, or even short story authors, they have stuff in the drawer. Even Stephen King, he says he's got a couple manuscripts that'll never see the light of day. Yeah, he wrote the whole thing and then thought, just isn't working. And just not going to see the light of day with that. So it's great when one of those, if you just hang on to them, they sometimes will wait until it's time. And then when the world's ready for it. So thanks for doing this. Next week, we're going to return to our discussion of voice in fiction. And we're going to be talking about lyrical and oratorical. And Aaron's going to be back in charge again because, I can tell he's feeling a little insecure about not being in charge. So
These are whole issues.
And so you can reach us. You can reach me at altongansky.com, Molly at franklymydearmojo.com. and aarongansky.com. And then for Heather Luby at heatherluby.com, one B in Luby. And tell folks about the show if you would, and visit aarongansky.com. You can see archives and more there. So good
Real
place to
quick,
go.
Before we close off, Dave Fessenden just popped up and asked Aaron if you'd like to talk about Right to be Heard on his blog.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. If he sends me an email, that's the only way I will remember. I'm going to be super busy tomorrow, but as long as he's not planning on publishing tomorrow morning, I should find a way to put something in there. Absolutely, yeah.
Great.
And I do want to say that we are thinking about. I know we have several listeners in the path of was it Hurricane Matthew or Tropical Storm Matthew or whatever the case may be.
All of the above.
Yeah, and so that was kind of a scary moment. From what we understand, they're fine, and so that's good news. But we do know there's a lot of damage and stuff down there. Some people still without power and the like. So chat room was a little bit less full tonight.
Shallow.
But we do, shallow. We are thinking about you guys.
Did you just call the people in the chat room shallow?
Once it came out of my mouth, I couldn't pull it back in. So
and then I agreed with you.
Oh, not what I meant.
Molly's email address is
yeah. So it's all Molly's fault. But
okay, I'll take that.
All right. Well, we thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.